many of you out here come to learn and be enlightened by me. My name is Pankaj, which is P-A-N-K-A-J, Papa Alpha November Kilo Alpha Juliet. If you have a name like mine, you need to learn to spell it out phonetically. From my accent, you're wondering, yeah, I've heard this before, I know where he's from. You would be wrong. I'm not from London. I'm originally from India. I've now lived in Edinburgh for the past 5 summers, which is 26 years. I now have a hyphenated identity, Scottish and Indian. What does that mean? That means that both my identities, my Scottish identity and my Indian identity, they rejoice every time India thrashes England. Okay, let's talk about science. In the wacky world of science and engineering research, we've had 2 types of researchers. We had theorists, picture Isaac Newton, sitting comfortably under an apple tree, an apple happens to fall, and Newton discovers gravity. Gravity is, of course, what gives us weight, and we are cursed with never being able to use it. And then we had theorists. So that was, Newton was a theorist. Then we had experimentalists like Robert Hooke, working away in his lab with telescopes, pendulums, and springs. The world of science communication has changed drastically from the time of Hooke and Newton to now. Hooke and Newton's rivalry is well known. Hooke accused Newton of plagiarism. You stole my gravity idea. And Newton is said to have made Hooke's portrait disappear from the Royal Society. I don't know if that's called photo finish. Anyway, so we scientists today will never do that. We are extremely civil to each other. Except when we anonymously review each other's research or grant proposals, we change from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde. Another big change is now I'm here speaking to you, hopefully trying to communicate in simple language. In those days, science was meant for elitists. So Robert Hooke presented his theory of elasticity using the following alphabet: CEIINOSSSTTUV. Any idea what that is?
Lots of letters.
Well, it's an anagram for ut tensio sic vis, which in Latin, it essentially means as is the force, so is the extension. So the more you pull something, or the more force you apply, the more it will extend. Right? So, I mean, these guys would have crushed Wordle. So, what am I? Am I a theorist or an experimentalist? Actually, I'm neither. I champion the third category, which is computer simulation. I assure you that most experiments are as outdated as a glitter ball in a modern nightclub. Right? Consider the problem. From what height do I push my annoying boss so that they break their bones? Now, now I could go old school, take them to the lab, right? And basically, I mean, to do a proper experiment, I need to make them sign an informed consent form. which basically means they are willing to be a crash test dummy. Now that's unlikely to happen, right? So, alternative simulation. I write a code and then let the computer do the bone-breaking maths for my virtual satisfaction. Now, writing such a code, putting in the right physics, is not a cakewalk. It requires effort. But the beauty is, once it's done, it will work not only for my boss, it will work for everybody's bosses. Right? But on a more serious note, we use codes such as this to estimate fracture risk in the elderly or people with bone tumors. As you know, as we grow old, bones become more brittle, and it's particularly true for postmenopausal women. So, no, that's fact. It's not meant to be a. Right. So now, what input do these codes require to do their magic? Just three things. First, the geometry. What does the object look like? Now, we're not thinking handsome or pretty. We're looking at the actual shape. Then the materials. Again, think mechanical properties and not your favorite pizza topping. And the third is the forces they experience. It's the stresses that we are talking about, and not the sort of stress you feel when your boss asks you to do the 10th revision to the report. Right? So what are the perks of simulation? The perks of simulation are no filling out of endless health and safety forms, no decking yourself in hard hat, high visibility jackets or steel-toed boots. Although you'll remember in the past month election season, we had Sunak and Starmer using hard hats and high visibility jackets. They became very, very popular. Of course, Nigel Farage continued to don his Make America Great Again cap. He probably doesn't remember we Brexited from the US a few centuries ago. Right, none of that for me. I just comfortably lounge in my bed with my laptop or sit in my chair with my feet propped on the desk and dive into simulations while puffing a bit of pot. With computers becoming increasingly powerful, computer simulations are now the new superheroes of science, engineering, and medicine. They are budget friendly and they pose fewer risks than a cup of herbal tea. Now, in my previous incarnation, about 25 years ago, most of my work related to predicting the behavior of big structures such as nuclear power plants and dams when they were subjected to an earthquake. And now my work relates to how our skeletal system behaves due to daily activities, such as our bad habit of getting out of bed. So you can say that my work has moved on from Godzilla battles to daily dance-off with gravity. My work now looks at the big question of aging gracefully. How do our muscles and bones morph as we age? What is the ultimate recipe for changing joints? Is it extra butter? Probably not. And how do you solve the age-old problem of fixing fractures? Turns out it's not a job for duct tape and super glue, but it's a job for Meccano. I don't know if you played Meccano as a kid. So this is like a plate with a lot of holes in there, and basically surgeons put a plate like that with the holes. Can you see that? And they just screw it in. Now, for a second, assume you are surgeons, right? And you got to put in screws. Now, there's one possibility, there's lots of holes. Would you rather put option one? Would you rather fill in all the screws so that the bone stays in its place and doesn't move. Option 2, you probably put 2 or 3 screws on either side of the fracture, if there is a fracture gap, and let the bone fragments move close to each other. Okay, those for option 1, just shout out 1. Those for 2? 2. 2s have it, and that's the right answer. So, essentially, if there is a fracture gap and there is a little bit of movement, then essentially that promotes healing and the gap gets filled up. So, essentially, surgeons can actually cut your bone, create a gap, put in something like this, and you then get a longer limb. That's how I became so tall. Right, so that's the, now when you are doing research on human subjects or simulations on human subjects, then experimental validation of your simulation is seen to be crucial. Why? Because if you mess up, your simulations are wrong, then people might get worse or they might even die. Or as we say in our language, they might upgrade themselves to the ghost status. And there will be questions asked, right? So validation is important. But designing nuclear power plants, no validation required. Why? Because if we goof up, there won't be anyone to ask questions anyway. Now let me tell you why some of this validation and experiments are completely useless. So, Suran, can I have you to hold this? So suppose I want to, this is a hip bone, or it's not a real hip bone. Now, suppose I want to figure out how much load it can take due to daily activities. Now, I take it to the lab, it gets clamped here, clamped, and then you apply a load here, and voila, I've got the answer. But hold on a second. This is the knee. The knee is a hinge joint, and this is a ball and socket joint, right? And then of course there are muscles and ligaments which are supporting the bone. Try replicating that in the lab. You can't do it. Whereas in simulations, it's possible to include all these complexities. Yeah? But the standards expect us to actually verify our simulation results with the experiment. We're not trying to validate experiments, we're trying to figure out what happens in the real human body. Now consider large structures such as nuclear power plants subjected to earthquakes. Now, you can't actually put a whole plant on a shaking table to figure out what happens. So what do? They use scaled models. But what are we scaling? Are we scaling the dimensions, the masses, the gravity? It's like shrinking the whole elephant into a toy for your daughter's pram and expecting it to behave the same way. So, research has now shown that using scaled down models to mimic the real thing is as useful as watching paint dry, and that too in slow motion. Now, the third thing is any medical product which goes into the market needs to jump through the hoops of clinical trials. Now, these clinical trials cost a fortune and they take so long that by the time they finish, you'll need, we talked about this, you'll need a time machine to go back and start using the product. Right? So, they're real waste of time and energy. Now the regulators have started to say, we're okay with in silico or computational models too. And what computational models permit you to do is you can use the same product on different patients, right? Or you can use different products on the same patient. Yeah, it's very easily possible. Yeah, and also if you want to change a specific feature of a patient, that's possible. Imagine doing that in real life. Picking up, excuse me sir, can we grow your tumor? No, I stick to in silico trials then. I mean, some clinical trials are useful, but computational models are like a cheat sheet to actually speed things up. Now, very often I get criticized and told, look here, you got all these sophisticated computational models, and this is a crystal ball you use to predict things. How do we know that this is just not a fancy snow globe? Yeah? If you have so many knobs, so many parameters to input, yeah, there are a huge number. How do we know you're pressing the right parameters which will make the real rabbit appear? But actually, honestly, they've got a point. And this is where I practice, personally, my research practice the principle of parsimony, which is the Occam's razor. So if you have two possibilities or two hypotheses, then always consider the one with the least number of assumptions. Don't think of one which makes the unicorn appear. So for example, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. If you're calling your partner and you get a message they can't be reached, then probably the batteries died down and not because they are in some scandalous activity. Yeah? Or if you have 1,000 sub-postmasters saying there's something wrong with the horizon system, you don't start assuming they are all cheats. Right? Okay, so I keep getting invited to clinical conferences to tell clinicians how to operate. I'm like a football coach who's never kicked a ball. And very often clinicians will ask me, look here, will there be a time when we can actually run these simulations ourselves? And I say, yeah, that will be the day I start performing surgeries. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, but before I let you ask questions, I actually had a couple of questions from some of my colleagues, and I'll just answer those first.
Yeah.
So the first question is from one of my clinical colleagues, and he says, look here, in order to put a hip implant, I actually need to, bang the implant into the bone. So can your simulations actually tell me how many hammer blows I should apply? The answer, you don't need simulations to predict that. You just need to read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The answer to everything is 42. The second question, again, this is from a colleague who's about as young as I am. And he goes, hey, without experimentation, how do I figure out which sexual positions I enjoy? Hey mate, if by your age experimentation hasn't helped, then essentially you proved my point, physical experiments are also passe. Thank you very much.
Just a little bit squeamish, that's all. So just a quick question, hands up. Who would be willing to get operated on by a surgeon who's not actually done that surgery